Okay, so today I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about what it means to like love someone who's different from you, because particularly I've seen this in religions where they have this mentality, which I think most of us kind of just accept without really like bringing it to the chopping block and really analyzing. And that belief is that they can love other people that are different from them. Um, by kind of separating them from what they do. They love them, not the things they do. Or you hear love the sinner, not the sin. Um, now, no, preconceived judgments on this statement itself. I think it needs to be analyzed because there's some interesting conclusions that come out of it, and so that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today.
For sure. So, first, we want to point out that this will not be a conversation of just the knee-jerk response that a lot of people have, which is basically, well, if you're just being bigoted, basically, and thus there's something wrong with the view, because it is more complicated than that. And so I think we wanted to cover a few different things. The first thing that we can talk about is what do we mean by the you question? So this connection between what you do and who you are.
Yeah.
So in other words, who's being loved? And then what does it mean to love?
Yes. There's a lot of philosophy around the question of what it means to be something or who you are or what your identity is and whether it's legitimate or not. And just to throw a few interesting ideas out there from existentialism, we get this very interesting perspective from Sartre, who basically says that you are only your actions and what you do. That ultimately that is the only thing that can be described as you, which obviously that would immediately be counter to this position. But there are other conceptions as well, like is what is you something that is self-proclaimed? Is it something that you are the person who gets to decide who you are? There's also maybe some problems with that, but there's a lot of different ways to look at identity.
So let's maybe throw out, there's also, so there are self-constructed identities, which Hash was mentioning, and then there are different conceptions of non-controlled identities, right? Popular, like modern conceptions of the non-controlled identity would be something like what's the official term for that? It's where there are multiple selves going on at the same time. They just are interlapping with each other. It's kind of like you're being birthed and dying all the time.
Like different identities come and go. There's different views on how quick of a turnaround that is. Some people are like, it's like, a slow process of shifting identity over time. And that's the real you. Some are like, no, there's literally like 6 different voices in your head going on at once. And there's like one, usually it's like considered this like deep hurt child on the inside that is like the one that is you, really you. And we're not trying to poke fun at any of these perspectives.
This is just information.
Yeah, this is just information. There's a lot of different ways of looking at it. And there's actually reasons why you would like particular views over other views. So, for example, the ability to be like self-determined about your identity is really, really nice because, well, you are you, and this is something we're gonna run with. For all intents and purposes, you probably are the best person to go to for information about yourself. But there's also downsides to that because sometimes people say they are one thing when it seems like they are not that thing. And that's a difficult thing to deal with, which is where having your identity be something that is more explicit, like based strictly off of your actions, becomes a more popular thing. When like in a criminal system, this is usually how it goes, where like we consider you to be synonymous with the things you do in order to properly deal with you. That's a different conception of identity. You may think you're innocent, but if the court finds you not innocent, you're not innocent, at least in that view. So, yeah.
Well, and this is fun, so let's just keep poking holes in it. So when you say, I believe something, there are essentially two ways of looking at this. One would be doxastic voluntarism, and the other doxastic involuntarism, which is just fancy speak for I am the determiner of my beliefs, or I am not the determiner of my beliefs. This is one of the more interesting talking points on the identity of self, and it is very relevant because we have the most empirical evidence about this one. And the sociological evidence is pretty strong. It says that we can basically guess what your beliefs are going to be to a surprising degree based off of just the environment that you find yourself in, which is a little bit disturbing to think about, maybe. But so that I don't think very many people find themselves to be in the academic world very, thoroughly doxastic voluntarists, because it's just so hard to defend. And even from a phenomenological point of view, you're like, well, okay, do I determine what I believe? It's difficult, because don't you just believe what you believe? What is the process of finding something convincing even like? Don't you just find it convincing? It's difficult to say that you find it convincing for particular reasons, because you only take those particular reasons to be convincing because you find them convincing. So it's just kind of this trail that you run down that no one's really found a good bottom to.
Yeah, and the wild thing is the spectrum here of options. You have the position that's like yourself is determined by your environment 100%. There's no distinguishing between those, and the other, which is like radically no, you are your own indivisible soul or self or something like that. Which of these is you? Who the frick knows? But it's an important thing to consider when we're making the claim that you have a certain type of connection or relationship with that thing.
Yes.
Now, because think about this. If we were to say that you were we took the complete materialist perspective on what a you was, which already has some issues of its own, but it would basically say that you are the collection of cells that are working together right now in this, human organism. And that is what you are. Now that would be like taking a tiny slice of you that has zero thoughts to think about and being like, I love that thing. And it's like an object. Usually we take the concept of a loving relationship to be more than just you're an object and I have a relationship with you as an object. There's some psychologically relevant relationship connection thing going on. So I kind of see what I'm getting at is it really depends how you conceive of this self in order to describe what your relationship to it is.
So first, then, let's put this in context of the conversation at hand.
Yes.
Which would be what we might call the Christian saying, though it might be applicable in other places too, of love the sinner, hate the sin. When you say love the sinner, we've got to parse this in some way. Now, we could present that, generally speaking, the Christian worldview says that you have a soul, and because of that, there's a very defined self. Now, fascinatingly enough, that's where the easiness stops, because the moment you try to say, okay, fine, you've got a soul and a body, well, how much is the soul and how much is the body? Most Christians don't interact with this very deeply because it's just a difficult thing to talk about. And most philosophers who talk about it end up in kind of a weird position where you either go all the way down Descartes' route, where you're like, look, there's a infinitesimally small thing that is actually me, the determiner of me, that's the soul, and it's somehow interacting with everything else. And he came up with the idea of, what was it, the pineal gland in the brain was the connection.
Yeah, there's this one little connection in your brain that's actually where the soul connects to reality.
And obviously we proved that very, very false.
Yeah.
No one holds that belief today, but there are still beliefs that are similar to it, which is this idea that there's like a spiritual thing. Under LDS theology, it's that there's spiritual matter that's just finer matter that we can't perceive right now. And basically, all I want to point out is that you can talk about the interaction problem of any dualistic system, which is interesting. How does the spirit and the world interact with each other? But it's more relevant to this conversation to just ask the simple question of what is in the soul? What is it? What is it that you are loving and not the sinner? In other words, in what ways do you conceive of yourself outside of your actions? Well, let's see if we can come up with perhaps a list. You might conceive of yourself outside of your actions in terms of the kind of base conscious experience that you take yourself to have, or the personality traits that you might take yourself to have, like more like a Jungian approach, I suppose.
There could be things that you do that are like, that wasn't in line with my personality.
Yes, there you go.
There's one distinction where you're like, here's the separation happening.
And other people would even put it along the lines of things that you intentionally do versus things that you that you unintentionally do.
So and so made me do that. That makes it them, not me.
Exactly. And all of these have problems, unfortunately. At the very least, it's all very interwoven. To be able to say that there is something separable in the end, well, I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. Things like your personality are so obviously connected to the material body that you have. We can influence your personality just with electrodes. It's fascinating.
We can change it with a little brain surgery.
Yeah. You can become an entirely different person. I think one of the most revealing examples of this was the study on a guy who had a railroad spike cleave his brain. And they did this intense case study of people who knew him beforehand and people afterwards. And the man, let's see if I can get this right, he lost his moral sentiments changed. And he became, I think they said he became angry, difficult to live with, just kind of irate in general. Like he would react quickly to things that he didn't react to before. And you might not think that that's a big deal, but from the case studies, that's what got interesting, is that the people who said they knew him before would not confidently claim that he was the same person afterwards.
Yeah. So you had some social opinion surface that said that this was relevant to his self.
Yeah, to his self. And that's fascinating.
It's very fascinating.
So anyway, try to push that wherever you want, parse the line. But it's relevant to this conversation where you parse.
Yes.
Because we're asking, it's specifically a claim that it is possible to parse, and that's why it's possible to love in these different ways.
So right off the bat, if we were to just end it right there, which we have a lot to say more, so we're not, but if we were to end it right there, we could just say, look, the ability to parse out the difference between what is someone and what is not someone in relation to what they do, that is something that no one has successfully done so far in a way that is convincing to people, in a way that can be like replicated or that is consistent across time. And right there we could say, okay, bankrupt already.
It's true.
But let's give them a little bit of leeway here and say that, maybe we can practice this thing that is parsing between what someone does and who they are. Because I think we all kind of do that on a social level, even the whole thing of that I mentioned earlier about acting outside of your personality. We all recognize that in ourselves, but we also recognize it in the people we know. We're like, that was kind of out of character for so-and-so. And this seems to be something we kind of do in a practical way, at least, pretty consistently.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, for the Christian conception of sinner versus the sin, we don't know what is included in the sinner. That's kind of what we pointed out, is like, what is where's the line between sinner and sin? But I also would like to just point out that maybe what it is it's as simple as saying that, like, there is something about the soul as a child of God, or as this like maybe you don't think of it as child of God. Maybe it's just like as a soul and nothing more than that. Maybe you simplify it all the way down to that, and then you say, I love that, and then nothing else that conflicts with what I believe. Now I think that's where we then have to ask the question, well, okay, what type of relationship are you trying to describe? Like, you say that you love this thing, this person. What do you mean when you say that you love a person? And what does that say about the thing that you are interacting with? Because if it's just like there's like this infinitesimal thing that is your soul, and you love that thing, what does that even mean for you to love that thing? Because if it was infinitesimal, it wouldn't even have thoughts, it wouldn't have actions. It would be very weird for you to be like, not only have I identified this thing, but I've identified a various amount of relationships I could have with this thing that has very little characteristics, and I have chosen the one that is love for this thing without characteristics.
So probably the way that this would be responded to is to say that it's not the infinitesimal nature of it, but the fact that it has in it the potential,
yes,
for some kind of greater humanness or greater godhoodness or whatever it might be, greater perfection. How to put this? If you're loving the potential, then that would have to potential is such a weird topic, and I don't want to say this wrong because I've had this conversation before and it was difficult. But when you say you love the potential for someone, then I just want to point out that only makes sense insofar as they still retain that potential. And the interesting thing is that under just a general Christian worldview, that's not always a thing. Like, it's possible to lose your potential in certain ways. And you would take certain people to be the kinds of people who don't really have that potential anymore because they've chosen different things in their life. So in other words, it's like you're separating it out only when it's convenient for you.
Yes.
Right? If you were to separate it out entirely, that there's all these attributes of self that we talk about, and then there's the thing that causes something beneath it all, and like it's the wellspring, I suppose, then that's how you should be interacting with everyone all the time, as just potentials.
So to put this in like social terms, this is how you would run up against this, what we're talking about here in society. If there was some, like, you probably heard this, where there's like some terrible criminal or something, that does something terrible, or a murderer, I don't know. People say, well, they're still a child of God and they could change. That is the two claims right there. Number one, you've said they're still a child of God. This is the soul. We've identified the soul, and the soul has some potential in it to change. Now, notice you don't see someone going up to a, devout member of their faith. Maybe if you're LDS, it's your bishop, and you say, I love them as a child of God, and I don't care about or even love them as a bishop or a righteous person. I only love them as a child of God. So maybe you're like, oh, well, obviously I love them as a bishop because that's a good thing. And then we would like to point out that, like, what you've then done there is shown that there is loving them as a child of God and then loving them as the person that they are, which I would say the latter one is more of a one-to-one with what we usually mean when we say love someone.
Oh, certainly. And you're only dictating which of those approaches you're taking based off of the kind of person that you're interacting with.
Yes.
If you perceive them to be a righteous person, then you take all of their actions and personality and everything else and put them into them.
Yeah.
And then if they aren't, then you strip those away and they are only the thing beneath.
Yes. But what's interesting is that the fact that those are different is usually kind of covered over when we talk about, love the sinner, not the sin. Like, if I were to say, okay, yeah, no, you love the sinner, not the sin, but you have a drastically different amount of love between a sinner and a different person, you would probably say, no, I love everyone. Trying to, like, make it sound like they're equal. But I don't think that that's the case, because you love only, like, this, like, really, really small portion of that person that is doing things you don't like, whereas you love all of people that you do like what they're doing. It's like you're like, I love them as a person, but I don't love them as a person. Whereas the other one, you're like, I love them as a person and as a person. Exactly. So we've kind of gotten around the issue in our discussion so far of deciding what it means to be a you, because it's an impossible question to some extent. But what we've tried to point out is that regardless of what the actual answer is there, when we're talking about loving someone, at least socially or intuitively, we understand there to be something in loving a person that is in relation to the things they do, and in relation to their potential, and maybe even in relation to their soul or something, or their just basic humanity if you don't believe in a soul. But that all of these are different parts of what it means to love a person, which means once you cut one of them out, it seems only fair to say that you do actually love this person less. And that's just from like a basic social intuition's perspective. Can you still say you love them in some way? Maybe. But
yeah. But what does that even mean?
Yeah.
At that point, it sounds more like you're just trying to like check off a box.
Yeah.
And like, well, yes, I still technically love you. And I also don't mean that as mocking as it sounded. Apparently, I sound really sarcastic all the time. But there it is. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say that the motivation behind that kind of action is all that good.
Yeah.
Because it really is like, well, yeah, I recognize that everyone has this kind of basic identity, whatever you take it to be, and that's what I love about them. And then you present that to them as if they should feel loved by that statement, that just seems silly, right? Why would someone feel particularly loved by that statement when they're so, palpably aware of the fact that that's not the kind of love that you give to people that you really love.
Yeah.
Right? And so surely we're talking about something different. We can call it by the same name, love, if we really want to, I suppose. But at the very least, it encourages a kind of conflation.
Yeah. Now, here's where a very important shift in how we approach this, I think, becomes very important to point out, which is we've been addressing this from the perspective of, do you love this person? Not from the perspective of, does this person feel loved by you?
Yes.
Which, now, there are divisions there are different camps about how you think love works. And there's definitely people in the camp of love is something I can send out, and that's what love is. But there's also the camp that says love is something that is received, and love sent nowhere isn't really love. And then also there's the camp that says it's both of those.
Yes.
Where love is a certain type of relation between things where you both, in some reciprocal way, have a certain attitude towards each other, or feeling towards each other, emotion towards each other. This is a further distinction that is completely lost by just saying, love the sinner, not the sin. Because think about this, and I've actually had this happen to me, where someone has said, I love you, but not the things that you do. And I've said, I don't think you love me.
Yeah.
like genuinely, I don't think you do. And then we've gotten into a discussion that then turned into an argument about whether or not they were justified in saying that I was being loved by them.
Yes. That's the painful part, is the argument never goes, do you love me? Because obviously that's not going to be questioned, because if they're expressing that, you just have to take things at face value, right? But the question of whether it matters that I, on the other hand, or Ash feels loved, or whoever it is, that's a big deal, right?
Yeah. It becomes very much so I think you're obligated to accept the fact that I love you. Which I think the greatest defeater for this is just, is that a very loving thing to do?
the expectation itself.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
In your loving relationships, would you think there's a correlation between the love you feel in a relationship and how obligated you feel to accept the love someone offers you? I think the answer is no.
Yeah, there's a great way of painting this, which is the classic. We could use the example of somebody with narcissistic personality disorder, where they will basically be telling you, I love you, and I want you, in fact, I demand that you tell me, or at least communicate that you feel that love, right? And that it's wrong. There's something wrong if you don't feel that love.
Yeah.
And a huge part of people coming out of such particularly abusive relationships is them coming to own the fact that their feeling of whether or not they feel loved is just as valid as someone's expression of that love. And so I don't want to make it seem like this is a small deal. I think it has some really big implications in how we interact with people, because I think that people can find themselves in just as abusive of relationships in regard to these sorts of religious sentiments, where they feel an undue pressure to take their life to be a certain way, that they should be a certain level of happy, that they should feel a certain level of loved, because they have these people who are basically telling them, look, I'm doing these great things for you. I love you. Yeah. Your life is great. Right?
Yep. Yeah. And I also think it's interesting to note here that there's two situations in which this whole discussion usually gets brought up. Number one is when someone like deviates and starts doing something that is contrary to the Christian perspective. Usually they're like, I still love you. I just don't love what you're doing. And I think what's interesting there is that usually, at least it feels like, the implication is like, I'm still reprimanding you, which is interesting. The other situation in which it comes up is on the flip side, when Christians are accused of not being loving, then they bring it up as a defense, where I love everyone. Now, notice that both of those situations don't seem to be like particularly loving actions, or you see what I'm saying here? Now, there is a situation, and maybe you as a parent or something are genuinely trying to communicate love through change in life. That would seem like more of a loving type of setting for this to occur. But frequently, the setting in which this occurs is one of reprimanding or defending oneself because of one's love that they send out. And those themselves are not very loving situations.
I think this is built in the idea that love is the sort of thing that doesn't have to be reciprocated to be love. Because what you get out of that is basically an overconfidence in your own position, where you take, it's too easy to take yourself to be right. Whereas I think a real loving relationship is one where either party is completely free at any time to express that regardless of any actions that are occurring, they don't feel loved. Maybe another good way of illustrating this is some of the feminist conversations that have happened over the past century. The idea that, let's say, a man could come home from work and he could sit down and say, where's the dinner? And then the wife can say, that there's a problem with that demand. Let's see if I can word this well, because that didn't come out very clearly at the beginning. But the idea is the man's response was usually, look, I am doing all the work. I'm doing all the right things for you to feel good and be happy. Thus, there's something wrong with you not being okay being a housekeeper, basically. Does that make sense? And so I think one of the things that we learned from that, which is really important, is that there's kind of a unique and personal element to what it means to feel loved. And there's no such thing as a set criteria of things that other people can do and you'll just automatically feel loved.
If we had that, I would at least hope that everyone would feel loved by this point.
Yeah. That's a good way of putting it, which we clearly don't. So it's good evidence against it.
I don't think it's something you can find a simple like calculus to do that says, love is happening here, which seems to be wrapped up in that statement.
Yeah. Which I think, just to directly tie it back then, this is what we mean when we're saying I think that I can confidently respond if somebody is to say something like that to me, I love you, but I don't love what you're doing. I think I can say you don't actually love me, because in order to love me, I have to feel loved. And maybe some people are still going to be like, well, but that's just so complicated. That means that I can't love everyone. And I think the answer is actually yes to that.
Love everyone.
That you can't, because to love someone, think about it this way, perhaps, to love someone without the further requirement of them feeling loved in order for your love to be valid, leaves you basically in a position where it only ever matters what you do. It only ever matters what you think. It's an entirely self-centered view. And then you just have to ask yourself the question, is love self-centered? And no, seriously, it doesn't matter whether you take this from a religious context. No, I think it's obvious to everyone that love is not self-centered.
Yeah.
And by that definition itself, you should be taking into account seriously whether other people feel loved in your calculation of if you are loving.
Yeah. Yep. And I think there's good reason why love is not seen as something that can be self-centered. And that is, like you mentioned this earlier, the idea that it's far too easy for you to think that you are loving someone or doing what is necessary to be a loving person when you really just aren't. And I think narcissistic personality disorder frequently illustrates this, where the person feels like they're doing everything that would be required to, to love someone. But from a third party standpoint, it is quite clear that what is going on is abuse. Not even just the lack of love, but like literal awfulness. And I think we can also illustrate this quite well through a podcast, actually, because if I were to, get all serious and be like, you, the person who's listening right now, I love you. Would you feel like that is genuine? Because like people do that, and maybe you do kind of feel like it's maybe a little genuine, but probably what's going through your head is like, you don't know me. Now notice I can get really confident about whether or not I know you. I can start saying, I think this about you. I think this is true about you. I can create this like description of who you are. And in all likelihood, it won't match you. And it will just further, solidify your belief that I don't actually love you. But as long as we take the position that love is something that is self-centered, that I can do to you, it doesn't matter what you think about my perspective on you. I can just be like, no, I'm sending love your way towards you. And you'd be like, that's not even me that you're talking about. And I can just be like, no, but I love you. And what you think doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's really good. And maybe another way of couching that in, a philosophical sense is insofar as you would take him to love you. In other words, insofar as you hear this statement, I love you, and you feel loved, well, then yes, that is love. But insofar as you don't take that statement to be love, then I don't think we can confidently say that Hash loves you. Now, interestingly enough, Hash just saying I love you to a random person through a mic is it's weird to say that could meet the requirements of love.
It's weird, yeah.
But
Love's a weird thing.
Yeah, and there's a lot to say about how concepts are always ambiguous in some sense, but I think it's still fair to say that that is at least one necessary attribute of love.
Now, we'd kind of like to point out that at this point in our discussion, we've kind of gotten to the situation where we're talking about how we see love. And we think there's good reasons. We've given you good reasons for why this is how love should work. But there's always more discussion to go into about what love is and what it looks like. Though I would love to share what it is that, like, kind of how we see this landscape. Because there are different types of relationships you can have. And my suspicion is that when you say, I love you, or I love the sinner and not the sin, what's happening there is that we're just misidentifying the type of relationship that you have. So I wouldn't say you have a loving relationship with this person. I wouldn't say that you love them insofar as you disagree dramatically with who they say they are, which is particularly important because that's a lot of what's happening is they're saying, you're not actually the person you say you are. Yeah. I love the person who you actually are. Yeah. I think the relationship going on there can be described in other ways. Maybe you say, I support you as a human being. Now, that doesn't feel as like validating to yourself, but that could very much so be true. You could also say, I support you in what you're trying to do. That could be true, but it would require you to be supporting them in what they do, which frequently isn't happening. But the idea is, like, we're not saying that you're disqualified from ever expressing some sentiment towards them, because I do believe there is some feeling going on when you say, I love the sinner and not the sin.
Yeah.
Now, I think it's just very important that we properly classify what that is, because I don't think we can call it love, but maybe we can call it something else.
Yeah, and this is based really out of, remember, we're not trying to gatekeep in an unnecessary way what love could possibly be. In other words, there's nothing wrong with, per se, my parents, for example, coming up to me and saying that sentence, I love you, but I don't approve of what you're doing. Because there are a lot of ways in which they love me. But I think, and this might be difficult, I suppose, for some people to hear, but I think there are some ways in which what we all really mean by love isn't something that you can have with somebody, this relationship that you can have with somebody, unless you take them for all of who they are, yes, all of who they present themselves to be, and love and trust and support, all of it. Mm-hmm. And I know that this could really hurt for a lot of people to think about, but this is what Hash is trying to get at, is that it's not like we're trying to say, look, you don't get to say that you have love. What we're really trying to point out is that you don't have it, and you don't realize that you don't have it.
Yeah. No, literally, though.
Like, that kind of hurts to say, not gonna lie. But I think for a lot of people, they legitimately think that they have this thing. They think that they are in the full loving relationship. And maybe they just don't even realize that it's not being reciprocated, because the self that's being identified is asymmetrical in the two people, right? One person is viewing their whole self, and then seeing that the other person is rejecting part of it, and then trying to claim that they still love him.
This actually brings me to this is a little bit plug for a philosophy book that I absolutely love, The Agony of Eros, by Byung-Chul Han. Go read it. It's really short, super fascinating. But a lot of his philosophy addresses this very concept, this idea that, like, we have, and maybe it is in an effort to try and bring us all together, we've kind of gotten really used to thinking we have relationships with people when we don't have relationships with people. And it can help us maybe work together more often. But he expresses the position that to actually love someone is a very significant thing. And it's something that everyone should be trying to do for sure, but that it's going to be much more momentous and a much more serious type of thing going on in your head than what you're going to see with everyday interactions with people. And I think,
and it's two-way.
Yeah,
the other side
yes,
of that.
Yes.
Right?
So he further goes to talk about how he understands love, or how he conceives of love, is something that requires you to do this really wild thing, which is, as a person, you interact with another thing that is different from you. And not only do you interact with something that's different from you, you for some reason accept it and everything about it that is different from you. So think about the relationship you have with any other thing in the world. Maybe it's even just an object like your car. Your relationship with it is usually defined by how you determine to use it, how it interacts with you in the sense that you are using it for certain things. In the ways that it conflicts with you, it is that relationship falls apart. But this would say that love is the interesting situation in which you truly encounter another person and you love them even in the ways that they conflict with you. And he further extrapolates that to explain why love becomes a painful thing sometimes, and why there is this very strange dynamic that like comes out of very loving relationships that is frankly absurd. But for him, he would say that that's the only place where you're going to find real connection, because you have two situations in life. You can interact with things that are just, you're using them as means towards whatever you're doing. And then you're really kind of just interacting with your own will as it manifests itself in the world. Or you're interacting with something that is radically different from you, that you can build a relationship even though it's radically different from you. I don't know if that made any sense, or if I was just ranting about one of my favorite philosophers, but
it definitely made sense in a lot of ways to me. Hopefully got across. And I want to point out another thing, which is I think it's also important to realize that if we take the self as a thing which is kind of immutable, or it stays the same like a spirit throughout the changes of a person's body and personality and yada yada yada, then it gives you this really interesting bias, which is that if you had a loving relationship with somebody at one point in time, you can take yourself to continue to love them even if that relationship disappears, because you think that it hasn't disappeared, because you think that you're still loving the deep, immutable thing despite of everything else that's changing.
Yes. Classic example. If you've ever visited your grandparents,
yeah,
and they just love you so much, and then you're talking to them about you, and they can't stop just bringing up things you did when you were 5. And they're like, do you remember that time when you drew this for grandma? And you're like, I'm 20. I would see these as separate people, to be honest.
And you do. And I think most people recognize that they end up renegotiating these relationships that they have with people, especially grandparents. I certainly did.
Yeah.
I mean, take my grandma. Nani and I had multiple different loving relationships because there was a different me, and in a couple of instances, a different her that we were interacting with throughout time. But what I want to point out is that we successfully navigated that renegotiation, where we loved each other through coming to know each other and still accepting and loving everything. Right. And I think that's where people miss the train and then take themselves to still be on the train.
Yes. And that kind of actually ties back into what I was trying to point out with Hans' philosophy, is that when you're interacting with your grandmother and she can only bring up things about your 5-year-old self, it doesn't feel like they're interacting with you.
Yeah.
It feels like they're interacting with their memories of you, which seems like it's theirs. It's like they're interacting with themselves. It's like they're just like using you as a mirror to help them more vividly remember things, which is actually kind of I don't know, it's not the greatest experience, because you're like, I feel a little invisible here. Like, you're just like not seeing me. But when you renegotiate a relationship, it becomes like a new encounter with them, and you see them as what they are right now. And part of that requires you to like be quiet and let them explain who they are, because they're different from when they were last. So, yeah.
And all the other things, it requires that you don't get to dictate what's part of them and what's not part of them. You don't get to dictate who they actually are in some significant sense.
Yes. And actually,
because you just encounter who they are.
So this is the reason. I'm glad we got to this. This is like full circle here. This is the reason why I thought it was important to start with the question of what does it mean? What is yourself? What is a person? How do we engage with that discussion and that entity? Because there is the standpoint that says people are, self-determine who they are. And that is one camp, like we talked about. And there are people who say that you don't determine who you are, your actions determine who you are, or various other things. Now, a lot of people think that when we say, like, I am this is my identity, and you should be respecting this identity, they take that to mean that we radically are in that first camp, which says, I determine who I am, and you just have to deal with who I am. And maybe, like, there are people who take that perspective. Personally, I don't take that perspective. The reason why I will say, you should take what I say as my identity seriously is not because I think I can define my own identity. I don't see myself as that free in so many regards. But the reason why I would say you need to take what I say about my identity seriously is because you have no idea what is going on in my life most of the time. And even if I am a terrible source of information about who I am, I'm still usually a better resource when it comes to figuring out who I am than you are. Do you see what I'm saying?
Or at the very least, so I like this approach. I do. We can take a self to still be the sort of thing which can exist in some kind of metaphysical sense, and then your ability to encounter that thing is obviously going to be more correct at any given point of time than another person's encountering of that thing.
Yes.
Right? But we can also
by and large.
But we can also just separate it into an internal and external conversation, which is that it's very possible that there is no such thing as a self that exists in any real way, and that instead we simply experience a thing, and we call that experience or collection of experiences or interaction of experiences, there's so much conversation about it, but in some way it's a thing that you experience as a self, or a kind of experience, I should say. I should be correct here. So a kind of experience is the experience of a self, which is entirely separate from what you perceive in other people as selves. In other words, that it's just like breaking that connection, that there is like a thing that I perceive and you perceive. Instead, a self is just an experience that I have, and the conception of self that I have for Hash is all the information that I get from Hash. Mm-hmm. It's literally the things that I do, the personality that I just perceive him to have through things that are occurring. And honestly, I give the most weight to that view. I think it's the most accurate way of describing things.
And here's the wild part. So maybe you don't like my view. Maybe you don't like Adam's view. But again, we can really simplify the whole discussion by asking the question, which way of approaching this is going to successfully build relationships of love and make people feel loved? Is it going to be you saying, I love you, and then like not letting them have a say on whether or not that is true? No, it won't. Just practically speaking, even if you're right, even if you're 100% right, it just probably won't work out very well for you. And I speak from experience. It hasn't worked well for me either. So my suggestion is, metaphysics aside, maybe listen to people about how they feel about your relationship with them and like take it seriously and maybe even treat it like the law in your relationship, because telling them that they're wrong about the relationship you have with them is probably a good way to like end a relationship.
Yeah. That's another good thing to remember, is that the very process that you go through in trying to figure out if you have a relationship is going to affect whether or not you have that relationship. In other words, it's an ever-changing, dynamic thing. You can't just take yourself to have a particular relationship with someone at any time. It's the sort of thing that you encounter yourself having with someone while you're with them in a really technical sense, right? And then you perceive that to kind of persist until the next time that you interact.
And there's a little mini reevaluation.
Yeah. Because it doesn't actually persist in a technical sense.
There's no new information going on usually. Relationships are wild. They're like the most fascinating thing that we do. And I think, barring all else, like how we talk about them and how we view the relationships that we have is something that like we could all do better at taking seriously, and seriously evaluating. Again, where we started with this was that like Christians say this, they've been saying this for a long time. And other groups of people also say this. A lot of parents take up this mentality as a default with their children. But I think it stands to be considered more heavily, whether or not it holds up or whether or not it's even useful.
And this isn't just for the sake of rigor. This is for the sake of the relationships themselves. Mm-hmm. Because I guess we're just trying to speak from the position of those who are often told that they are in loving relationships when they don't feel that way. Yeah. And that's kind of the principal motive behind the conversation. Because obviously, if it was just the other way around, if it was just people spouting I love yous all over the place despite your actions, then there'd be nothing to complain about. Obviously, there's nothing like inherently bad about that.
Yeah.
But it's not the way to actually go about having a relationship with somebody.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Yeah. And this is a very fun topic. I've enjoyed talking about it. I would like to just a little call out here. We both have families. And families that may potentially listen to this podcast.
This is true.
And may be reconsidering things after having heard this podcast. And, speaking directly to you, if you're listening to this, maybe there is some reevaluation that needs to happen in our relationship. Podcast isn't the way to figure out whether or not that's actually the case.
Yeah, that's such a good point.
Reach out to us. Talk to us. Maybe have a one-on-one conversation about where our relationship is at. Don't be like, he said this on podcast. I'm pretty sure he was talking about me. Because,
in other words, that would be missing the whole point.
Exactly.
Because we aren't directly encountering you right now. So right now is not the time to evaluate.
We're encountering our regular, 3 listeners right now. And I don't, yeah.
Anyway, this is a good point. Yep. But again, hopefully you have lots of things to think about, and I hope you have a lovely day.
Mm-hmm. And hope we didn't ruin any of your relationships.
Yeah, no, that definitely was not the goal. If anything, is only to shine a light on what may be there without you realizing it.
Yep.
Or may not be there. So this is the end of Avocado Inc.
See you, maybe not next week.
Oh, yeah.
Week after.
Yeah. Bye.